Hi friends, today we're doing Unit 9, Lesson 6, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado. We're going to start by going over the key vocabulary words you'll be hearing in today's reading. Our first word is blazed, marked or shown by marking a path or route. Our second word is convert, to change from one form to another, to change from one religion to another. Our next word is stunned, very surprised or shocked, can sometimes mean upset. Our last word is suspicious, without trust, causing questions or doubt. We are now going to move into today's reading. One day in 1536, Don Antonio de Mendoza, viceroy of New Spain, sat in his office in Mexico City listening to a fellow Spaniard, Alvar Nuñez, Cabeza de Vaca, tell an astonishing tale. Mendoza was fascinated by this amazing tale of adventure and survival in foreign lands. But the part of the story that interested Mendoza the most was the report Cabeza de Vaca gave concerning golden cities. While they were living with the Native Americans, Cabeza de Vaca had heard much talk about a land to the north of them, a land that was rich in gold. This land was called the Seven Cities of Cibola. It was believed that Cibola was a region to the north containing 7 wealthy cities, each one bursting with gold. Mendoza was excited by this report and was eager to find this gold. Mendoza decided to find the 7 cities of Cibola. He recruited a French priest named Friar Marcos, in addition a man named Esteban, a slave who traveled with Cabeza de Vaca, and who, along with de Vaca, survived the Narvaez expedition, was recruited to go along as a guide and translator on their investigative travels north. Esteban was a Moor who had been relocated to Spain as a slave. By the time Mendoza recruited him for the expedition to find the 7 cities of Cibola, he had become a very experienced explorer. Esteban had come in contact with different Native American groups on his travels and had learned a few things about their ways of life. In the spring of 1539, these 2 men, along with a group of Native Americans, set off to the north. They walked along trails that had been blazed or previously marked by Indian traders. Because Esteban knew the land well and traveled at a much faster rate than Friar Marcos and Friar Marcos wanted to preach Christianity to the Native Americans along the way, the 2 men decided to split up. Together they came up with a way for Esteban to get messages to Friar Marcos. If Esteban found a good-sized city with some gold, he was supposed to send back a small cross about the size of a hand. If he found a big city with lots of gold, he was supposed to send back a large cross about the size of an arm. If he found a huge city and a very large amount of gold, he was supposed to send back an even larger cross. After spending a few days scouting the area, Esteban sent Friar Marcos a cross the size of a man, indicating that Esteban either knew or suspected the existence of large cities with great quantities of gold. Friar Marcos was stunned or very surprised as he continued to follow Esteban's path. Friar Marcos followed Esteban's footsteps for several days until the messengers brought him disturbing news. The messengers told Friar Marcos that Esteban had been killed in a pueblo called Hueca, which was thought to be one of the cities of Cibola. The area known as Hueca is in present-day New Mexico. Esteban had presented himself to the Zuni of Hueca as a great medicine man and healer. The village elders in the pueblo were suspicious of Esteban and killed him. When Friar Marcos heard that Esteban had been killed, he decided it wasn't safe to go into Hueco because if he were killed, no one would know about their discovery of gold. Friar Marcos went back to Mexico, with only having seen the town of Hueco from a distance. He told the Spanish about their journey and about the large cross Esteban sent back, indicating the existence of large cities with great quantities of gold. The Spanish listened closely. They asked Friar Marcos if he had seen the golden cities of Cibola. Friar Marcos said he did. He told the Spaniards that Hueco was bigger and richer than Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. Friar Marcos was convinced that the truth behind Esteban's message of the large cross. Friar Marcos led the Spanish into believing he had really seen the city. When the Spaniards heard this, they believed that the city Esteban and Friar Marcos had seen might be El Dorado, the golden one. They had heard about from many native peoples, but had never been able to find. Soon all the conquistadors in Mexico hoped for the chance to explore and conquer this land of wealth. In the end, Mendoza appointed a young man named Francisco Vasquez de Coronado to lead an expedition to Cibola. In February of 1540, Coronado assembled his expedition in the town of Compostela in northern Mexico. Coronado wore bright, gilded armor. He recruited 337 Spanish soldiers, 220 of whom rode on horses. Also on the expedition were 700 Indian slaves who would serve the Spaniards and take care of large herds of sheep and cattle that would be marching with the men. There were also priests and a few women on this expedition. One of the priests was Friar Marcos. Everyone was excited about getting rich from the gold they would find in Cibola. Coronado and his men marched north through the hot, dry lands of northern Mexico, covering 10 to 15 miles a day. When they came to rivers, they built makeshift rafts and used them to ferry themselves and their animals across. They saw some small pueblos, but seeing that the Native Americans had no gold, Coronado and his men pressed on, crossing bush and desert and entering into what is now the United States. Friar Marcos and the Indian guides led Coronado to the pueblo of Hawiku, where Esteban had met his end. As Coronado and his men approached, the Zuni came out to meet them. They were carrying weapons and rocks, and they drew a line on the ground by sprinkling cornmeal as a way of telling the Spaniards they were not to come any farther. They were resolved or determined to protect their town. One of the Spanish priests came forward and began reading a long statement, while an interpreter tried to translate the message to the Zuni. It said that the Indians were expected to convert or change from their religion to Christianity and to accept the King of Spain as their king. If they did not agree to do so, then the Spanish would attack them. The Native Americans listened for a while, but then began shooting arrows and tossing stones. Coronado and his men charged. The Zuni men ran back to their pueblos. They fired arrows and threw rocks from the top of their pueblos built on hills and cliff sides for protection. Coronado was hit by a big rock. Then a second rock struck his helmet and knocked him off his horse. He lay on the ground unconscious while his men carried on the battle. Coronado's men did, in the end, win the battle. They quickly discovered that Hawiku was not a vast city on the same scale as Tenochtitlan. The Zuni lived in pueblos, multi-story houses made out of stone and plaster. The Zuni people who lived there had no gold, no silver, and no valuable jewels. The conquistadors were furious with Friar Marcos, and some thought he should be put to death for misleading them. What Esteban could have meant by sending back a large cross remains unclear. Regardless, Coronado did not give up hope. He sent men to explore the surrounding area. After all, there were supposed to be 7 cities in Cibola. He hoped that some of the other cities would have more gold than Hawiku. For the next few weeks, Coronado and his men continued to explore the region of Cibola. They found many pueblo villages but no gold. Coronado decided to split his forces up. He sent scouting parties off in several different directions. One party traveled northwest through Hopi territory in what is now northern Arizona. They went on until they were stopped in their tracks by a massive canyon, more than a mile deep. These men from the Coronado expedition became the first known Europeans to see the Grand Canyon, which is now considered to be one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. Another party traveled southwest along the Colorado River, several hundred miles downstream from the Grand Canyon. Today, this section of the rivers forms the border between California and Arizona. A third party headed east from Cibola through eastern New Mexico. They visited the Acoma Pueblo. A pueblo can still be visited today near present-day Albuquerque, New Mexico. This party crossed the Rio Grande, a large river that runs south through New Mexico and forms part of the present-day border between the United States and Mexico. They passed north through the land of the 12 Rio Grande Pueblos, an area by the Rio Grande occupied by Native Americans, who the Spanish called the Tehuelche Indians. There they observed the Great Plains, where great herds of buffalo roamed or wandered. The Spaniards were fascinated by the shaggy buffalo. At first they found it a difficult animal to hunt. In time, however, they learned to hunt the animal with spears, as the Native Americans did. While the Spanish were on the plains admiring the buffalo, one of their native guides told them of a place far to the east called Quivira, a wealthy city. Hearing this, Coronado decided to march east, hoping to find Quivira and the gold he had missed in Cibola. In their search for the 7 cities of Cibola, the Spaniards treated the natives they encountered horribly, killing many of them. Coronado and his men crossed into Texas, then on to the Great Plains, where tens of thousands of buffalo grazed around them. During their journey, they met the Corachos, nomadic natives of the Great Plains who lived by following the buffalo herds. These Native Americans of the Great Plains were hunters of the buffalo. They used the meat of the buffalo for food in addition to the plants they gathered. They used the skins to make clothing and shoes. They used the bones of the buffalo as well as stones to make tools. They burned buffalo dung or manure for fuel. Coronado and his men learned a lot about the Quechos' way of life, including the fact that they had no gold. Coronado and his men decided to move on, making their way through parts of Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Finally, Coronado and his men reached Quivira. Instead of a wealthy city, they found a few villages and some grass huts. There was no gold whatsoever, and his men decided to spend the winter near Quivira before beginning the long journey back to Mexico. Coronado and his men had ridden forth on this expedition so confidently with high hopes of finding gold, had no success in finding wealth. He and his men limped back southward to Mexico with no gold. In fact, Coronado had lost a large sum of money that he invested in the expedition. You may now move on to Unit 9, Lesson 6, Google Form.